Affective neuroscience looks at the neural basis of emotions and mood. Okay. And since 1868, you find large volume of research, okay, where the emotional reactions, emotional processing, entire affective processes and their location in the brain, or the effect of mood regulation based on the chemical or anatomical or functional asymmetries, all types of descriptions you find. Now, these are the prominent structure in the brain that has been considered to be important for human emotional reactions: the frontal lobe, the thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, hippocampus and the olfactory bulb. Look at this animation. Here you can find the amygdala and the hippocampus, and these two are considered to be of vital importance as far as the human emotional reactions are considered. Now, it is very interesting for us to understand that fine, when you receive a emotional stimulus, okay, how do we feel it, one, and two, how does the body respond to it. So, what is the neural underpinning behind it? And you can see here on your screen right now what is popularly called as the Papage circuit. What happens? The information that you receive through your sense modalities, the emotional stimulus, it reaches the sensory cortex through the thalamus. Okay. And then there are two routes. Okay. Hypothalamus receives the information that has been transmitted to the thalamus, and from the hypothalamus it follows a loop which has interior thalamus, the cingulate cortex and the hippocampus, and this is important to generate feeling. Okay. And on the other hand, we have the sensory cortex which passes on the information to the cingulate cortex, and once again it also contributes to your feeling component, and at the same time, okay, the bodily reactions that we show that are considered to be proportionate or supposed to be proportionate with the emotional stimulus that you have received. Okay. This is largely dependent on how the information is processed. So, you have the feeling component, you have the bodily reactions, and both of them are primarily dependent on how the brain processes these information. Thalamus simultaneously directs emotional stimuli to sensory cortex and the hypothalamus, and it goes to sensory cortex as stream of thought and to the hypothalamus as a stream of feeling. Okay. So, when you have seen here in this case, okay, so when it goes to the hypothalamus, this goes as a string of feeling. When it goes to the sensory cortex, it goes as the string of thoughts, and the series of connection from hypothalamus, anterior thalamus and cingulate cortex, it is important for us. The cingulate cortex, it integrates the signals from the hypothalamus with the information from the sensory cortex. So, we have the cingulate cortex, hypothalamus, hippocampus, okay, and this allows the top down control of the emotional responses. It is interesting in behavioral sciences that you can approach any concept, any psychological attribute from two different viewpoints. One that we have been doing till now, that is you right away look at the exact attribute that you are trying to look at, and then you move in that direction. Okay. So, you actually look at what type of functions the individual is performing, and then you look at corresponding areas in the brain. We have already seen such things during the discussion on this very course. The other way is that you do not approach problem this way, but you looked at what damages have been caused to the brain, and depending on which area is affected by the damage, you look at the anomaly that is observed in the behavior. So, the deficit that you find in terms of a behavioral output is therefore correlated to the damage that has been caused to the brain. Look at this image. Here you have the thalamus, hippocampus, amygdala, hypothalamus, olfactory bulb, and then what is popularly called as the limbic system. Now, these are the areas in the brain that are considered to be responsible for processing of emotion. Once you have damage to any of these areas, the chances are that you would have some problem in terms of exhibiting the emotion, or trying to understand the emotion, you commit certain errors, there is flattening of emotion and so forth. Researchers have found deficit in emotional expression in the right hemisphere damaged patients. So, we have discussed it that fine, we have the two hemispheres, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, and then once the damage has been caused to the right hemisphere, the chances are that there would be certain deficit in terms of expression of emotion. Let me share with you an interesting study. Here the right hemisphere damaged patients, they were shown photographs of starving child and crying women. Now, starving child, crying women are the images that will perturb you, that will really move you within. Now, when these images were shown to the patients who had right hemisphere damage, primarily there was flattening of the affect. Okay. Flattening of the affect means you do not feel the emotion the way a normal human being would feel after having a look at those photographs. Therefore, the suggestion was that few facial expressions of emotions will have flattening of affect, even though you have a stimulus that is extremely emotionally charged. Comparatively, if you look at the left hemisphere damaged patients, the leveling of the emotion was more pronounced. Okay. So, in one case you have a higher pronouncement of an emotion, in the other case you have the flattening of the affect. Let me share with you a couple of research papers that has primarily looked at the morphology, the anatomy, the function of the brain and then emotion. Here you see in the image that you have the PET results, the positron emission tomography result, and primarily you are looking at the T values when you have experience compared to when you do not have it. Now, these are for two sets of experiences, the happy and the sad experiences. Now, you have the same PET records for anger, fear, and now you can see the comparative image what is referred here as figure 3, where you have happiness, fear, anger and sadness, these 4 images. Now, this actually tells you that fine, you have the emotion related activity in selected areas of the brain. So, the anticipation is that once you have damage to those selected areas of the brain, your ability to level an emotion, your ability to express an emotion, this will get diminished. Look at another study. This is primarily a study, fMRI based study of neural responses to angry and happy vocal expressions. Now, it is not the facial expression, it is the vocal expression, and only 2 emotions have been taken, and instead of PET, the technique used is the functional magnetic resonance imaging. And here you come across the results where you have the distinction between the 2 emotional states, the happy and the anger vocal emotions, and how these 2 expressions differ. What I am trying to tell you is that there is a viewpoint in the understanding of emotion, that you can look at emotion exclusively with respect to the functioning of the brain, that is the normal brain. The 2 papers that we had referred to here, one that was based on the positron emission tomography technique and the other that was based on the functional magnetic resonance imaging. Now, they were looking at the healthy brain and how certain areas of the brain gets activated when you are looking at a certain type of an emotion expression, or when you hear a certain type of sound that is emotionally laden. Therefore, you can always make a judgment that fine, in case you have damage to certain regions of the brain that has to do with emotion, then it will certainly affect the emotional regulation. It is also important and extremely important to understand the interaction between the biological background that is responsible for emotional reactions, as well as the cultural underpinning of emotional reactions, and how the biology and the culture it interacts. If you imagine a social situation, you would know, you can come forward with several experiences of from your own life, where you might have experienced situation that demands instant attention. So, very fast, very spontaneous reactions are needed, and there are also situations where these things can be delayed and a proportionate response can be generated. So, basically in terms of the interaction between the biology and the culture, if you look at, we have the subcortical direct route and we also have the neocortical, but indirect route. The subcortical direct route, it basically has the thalamus, the information goes to amygdala, and then we have the motor cortex and the limbic circuit. In this case, in the subcortical direct route, the responses are supposed to be very fast, spontaneous, unconscious, okay, largely physiologically governed, and the reactions are also involuntary. Compared to this, when you look at the neocortical route, which is also the indirect route, now here the information now passes from the thalamus to the sensory cortex to the prefrontal cortex, then to the amygdala, then the motor cortex, and then the neocortical circuit. Now, in this case you have a slower response, but then remember that these slower responses are also very conscious responses. In the previous case, in the direct route, we found that the reactions were also unconscious, whereas in this case it is conscious. In the previous case, in the direct route, we had the unconscious responses coming into being. In the indirect route, it is conscious process, and most importantly, something that is of extreme importance from the cultural point of view, from the social point of view, is that you have the possibility of appraisal of your own emotional reactions. What is also important is that the orbital prefrontal cortex, okay, the ventral medial part of it, this is the center which integrates the emotion and the cognition. Remember that if you are largely governed by your thought processes, okay, your responses might not be considered to be extremely socially important. Okay. You lose somewhere, you compromise somewhere on the social requirement. If your responses are largely emotionally driven, then also there could be certain trouble for you. The best thing is where you have your emotional reactions, you have your cognitive regulation, and then you integrate them. And the orbital prefrontal cortex is considered to be the center in the brain, which basically integrates the emotional and the cognitive processes. Little later, now we will also be talking about the cognitive emotion regulation. So, the emotions they largely depend on the biological processes, as physical medium is needed for expression of emotion. Okay. But then specific features of emotions are certainly culturally determined. If you take evidence from the phylogenetics, okay, species in which behavior is directly and strongly determined by biological processes, you find that the emotions are either absent or they are rudimentary. Okay. And there is a decrease in the influence of biological processes and the substitution by the cognitive processes that is evident in such cases. If you take dogs for example, or other higher animals, where they show certain degree of cognitive processing, okay, you also realize that they exhibit a few simple stereotyped emotions. The level of cognitive mediation between the stimulus and the response is very high in the human beings as compared to these higher animals, and hence they are able to exhibit wide range of emotion. And therefore, even though in the previous slide when we saw that there are a possibility of certain degree of emotions, stereotyped emotions basically being reflected by certain higher animals, you do not find them anywhere close to human beings. Our cortex is extremely receptive of the social experience, and therefore, this is a site of organization of physical and mental functions. The dominance of cortical center over subcortical functions in the human beings, it facilitates the control of socially derived experiences and expectations, which also includes emotions. And therefore, we do not exhibit disproportionate emotions, okay, and hence even though whether we are controlled by our indirect route, whether controlled by direct route, whether the emotional reactions are unconscious or conscious, okay, the slower or faster, but it is culturally appropriate. So, that is the beauty of human emotion reactions. So, When you have the cultural activities and concepts ingrained into human emotional reactions, you find that function, management, expression, organization, intensity and quality. Okay. On all the 6 parameters, you find that there is high degree of synchronization between what is socially desirable and the type of response that the person comes forward with. For example, you come forward with the function, okay, that your emotional reaction is supposed to perform. Say for example, you meet somebody in the corridor, okay, you give a broad smile and you wave your hand and you say hi. Okay. It serves a social function. Okay. You show to the man that yes, we are acquainted, I know you, I remember you. Okay. I do appreciate your presence here, and therefore, okay, this function that you perform, that the emotion that you show there, it serves a social function. You tend to manage your emotional reactions. You might not be pleased at all to see the person, but still you have a plastic smile on the face and you say that nice to see you. You know what to express, when to express, how much to express, the intensity of the expression. Okay. How do I organize my emotional reaction? Okay. These are interesting things. Take some awkward situations in life. Say for example, you are attending the funeral ceremony and you receive a joke on your SMS. Okay. These are incompatible type of experiences that you come across, but then you are much more refined in terms of what to show, when to show and how much to show. You organize your emotional reaction. Your expressions are pretty under your control, okay, and then you know what to minimize and what to maximize in your emotional reaction. Most importantly, okay, it is not only the degree, but also the quality of your reaction. Say if you are scared of something, you do show your fear. If you love somebody, okay, if you like something, you show your liking for the individual or for the object. Okay. If you are sad, if you are depressed, you express it. So, the quality of your reaction, okay, that also gets controlled, and then remember that on all these 6 parameters, quality, intensity, organization, expression, management and function, at all these 6 functions, we see that the cultural activities and the concepts, okay, they are well taken care of. Okay. But then we have been talking about the neural representation of human emotions, okay, and then we are now what we are seeing is that the biology, or you call it the neuropsychology of emotion, and the social and the cultural realities, they do integrate. Now, emotions they seems a natural phenomena controlled by biological mechanism that are beyond our control. This could be one aspect of looking at it, and thinking seems to be much more voluntary and controlled. Okay. But now we will see how gradually these things converge, and the thought and the emotions are somewhere now looked upon as if they are parallel processes. Okay. And for our convenience, although we look at it that way, but then it is largely integrated. Okay. And therefore, whenever you have a thought, okay, you think of a thoughtful feeling. Okay. So, feeling could also be thoughtful, and then all thoughts will also have a feeling component into it. So, you have the feeling side of the thought and you have a thoughtful feeling, okay, and therefore, there is an integration between the cognitive process and the affective process. The felt emotion depends upon the understanding of the situation in which it is triggered, okay, and understanding of course involves comprehension of the characteristics, causes, consequences of the event. Okay. Say for example, a father who is very disciplinarian, okay, he is very strict with his kids, and this part, this aspect of the father might initially elicit anger, but later you appreciate this man. Why? Because you do not look only at the characteristics, but you also look at the causes and the consequences, and what you finally find that the disciplinarian approach that the father was taking, the strictness that he was showing for the child, okay, was basically with a good intention, okay, because the father loved his child, okay, because the father wanted his child to learn good values, and therefore, he was turning to be a great disciplinarian. Okay. Now, the anger that you initially had looking at how the father was trying to discipline his child suddenly converts, it changes completely. Why? Because you do not look at the characteristics of the expression, but you are now also looking at the causes and the consequences. The intensity of the emotion depends upon the cognitive concepts. For example, fear generated on encountering a wild animal would depend on certain things. Okay. Say I come across a wild dog. Okay. I will look at the wild dog and look at three possibilities. One, the estimated likelihood of attack. Is this dog going to attack me? 1. 2, you look at the inflicting harm. Is this stimulus a cause of concern for me? Is it going to inflict some harm upon me? And 3, you also look at your ability to defend in case these two things happens. Okay. And therefore, the intensity of the emotion that you experience. Now, emotion is the feeling component of it, but what you would feel, how much you would feel, to what extent you would feel, how long you would feel, that would primarily be governed by these three thought processes, where you are looking at the estimated likelihood of the attack, you are looking at the inflicting harm, and then you are also looking at your ability to defend in case this thing happens. Now, smiling expresses joy. Okay. So, whenever you pass a smile, okay, it expresses that you are in the state of joy, but then it can also be used to express sarcasm. That is the expression. Okay. Now, take a very different example. Spitting is the utmost contempt in most of the population in the world, but interestingly enough, the Maasais of Africa, they use spitting to show their affection. Okay. In our case, we smile, we hug, and that is the indication of affection. Here in our culture, where if you spit, that is the utmost disgust that you could generate in the other person. No, it is the contempt that you are committing. But in this case, in the case of Maasais of Africa, your spitting, which is now considered to be an offense in most of the culture, is used to express your affection, diametrically opposite. So, what you do is not important, where you do becomes important. Now, it is time for us to talk about the cognitive emotion regulation, and here I would like to borrow the concepts given by Garnevsky and his associates. Okay. They have come forward with the cognitive emotional regulation strategies. Okay. And these strategies are: 1, self blame, and this is basically the thoughts of blaming your own self for the experience. Something has happened to you, okay, you process it, you look at it, okay, and to say that fine, I think this would not have happened if I would not have done this. So, basically you show a tendency to put the blame on your own self for whatever you are experiencing. The second cognitive emotion regulation strategy is acceptance. Okay. These are the thoughts of acceptance of what has happened. There is a great degree of acceptance of it. Then we have the third strategy, that is rumination. Okay. And rumination is basically thinking all the time about the feeling and the thoughts associated with the negative events. Remember that in rumination, what is important to note is that the event has the negative tone. Okay. And then what you actually do is that you anchor your thought and feeling that has to do with these negativities. The next cognitive emotion regulation strategy is positive refocusing, where there is a thinking of other pleasant matters instead of the actual event. Something has happened, it might be negative, it might be slightly positive, it might be neutral, but what I am doing is that I am thinking of the pleasant aspects of my experiences compared to the actual event that has happened to me. The next cognitive emotion regulation strategy is refocus on planning. Okay. And here one thinks about what step has to be taken in order to deal with the event. Okay. So, you have a situation, you plan some strategy to overcome it, okay, and then no, you refocus on your own plan, okay, you fine tune your own plan. Okay. So, basically you think about the steps that are needed, okay, in order to deal with the event. The next no, cognitive emotion regulation strategy is positive reappraisal, and this basically refers to the thinking of attaching a positive meaning to the event, okay, which is no, extremely important for the personal growth of an individual. And the last three cognitive emotion regulation strategies are putting into perspective, catastrophizing, and putting the blames on others. Putting into perspective basically refers to thoughts of playing down the seriousness of the event, okay, when compared to other events. So, what you do is that you have no, a negative experience in your life, you compare this very experience with the experience of yesteryears, okay, and while making this comparison, all you know, do is that you make an attempt to reduce, to compromise, okay, on the seriousness of the present event, okay, and thereby what would happen is that the negativity of the present experience that you are having right now, the present event that has induced certain degree of negative feeling in you, that will know, get reduced. The next one is catastrophizing, which is explicitly emphasizing the terror of the experience, and the last one is other blame, where there is a tendency of thinking in such a way that you put the blame for whatever has happened, okay, onto others. Okay. It is just diametrically opposite to what we were discussing in the beginning, self blame, where you replay your experience and then you own the blame for it. Okay. In this case, you shift the blame to the other person. Now that we have talked about the brain representation, we have talked about the neural circuit, we have talked about the interaction of the biological, the physiological and the cultural dimensions of affective reactions. It is also important to look at emotions from the arousal perspective. Okay. Means you are experiencing certain things physiologically, okay, and then you are also experiencing the emotion generated in that state. Okay. Kagan in 1988, he performed a study where he showed emotionally aversive film to participants, okay, and he was basically trying to find out the relationship between the arousal state and the emotional state. So, what was done that this emotionally aversive film, it was screened such that the stimuli was sent separately to the left and the right hemisphere. Okay. So, the two hemispheres of the brain, okay, they received the information separately. What was observed was, okay, that there was a high rise in the cortisol and the blood pressure, and you can see on your screen, okay, you have the left hemisphere on one side, the right hemisphere here, okay, the part of the image that is gray in color on the screen, okay, and such increase was not seen in the adult subjects. No? And what was interesting was also that the physiological arousal was unrelated to the emotional state. Okay. Usually what we would think of as a commonsensical thought is know that with the increase in the physiological arousal, okay, the emotional state will also undergo that change. But here what was observed, that when this information was sent separately to the left and the right hemisphere, okay, what was seen was that there was a rise in the cortisol and the blood pressure level in the brain, but then the physiological arousal was not related to the emotional state experienced by the participants in this experiment. What has also been observed in other studies is that the testosterone level changes, okay, when chess players they win or lose the match. So, you must have seen the chess players participating in the game, and based on whether they have won the match or they have lost the match, okay, the testosterone level in the players keeps varying, and one's attitude towards the experience is important rather than the experience itself, and this is of utmost importance. Right now, of course, our focus is more towards introducing you to various concepts, constructs in psychology. Therefore, we are not going into the details of many things, but the very fact, the statement that is mentioned here, that the attitude towards the experience is far more important than the experience itself. You will find this as a thumb rule if you look at literature, and if you look at courses pertaining to mental health, towards counseling psychology, and even in clinical psychology. It has also been observed that athletes who won, but did not regard winning as important, had little or no increase in the testosterone. Remember, what we have seen here is that in the case of chess players, if you lose or if you win the match, there would be a change in the testosterone level. But in the second case, in the case of athletes, what has been observed, that it is not that the winning is important, it is not that if you win the testosterone level will go up. Okay. Rather, how do you consider your victory? So, the attitude towards the experience, if you regard your victory, if you consider your victory to be significant, then the testosterone level will increase, okay. Otherwise it will not. And these are interesting dynamics when you look at the physiological response to emotion and the experience component of the emotion. This is a very recent work that was conducted here at IIT Kanpur. I would like to share this with you. In this study, what was done was, once again we were trying to look at the arousal and the emotion. The predisposing factors were the general stress and the pre-morbidity. Okay. So, all the participants, they were supposed to give their responses to questionnaires measuring general stress level as well as their pre-morbidity. Then we also had a series of short films screened to them, and they were of variable nature, right from extremely positive to extremely negative, okay. And that was on a somewhat so called linear pattern was followed in terms of arousal content of the stimuli. And then we were trying to look at that, find if you are exposed to such visual situations, what are the consequences? Consequences in terms of physiological arousal, consequences in terms of emotional arousal. What we were trying to do was that we were trying to identify the salience of psychological processes in machine diagnosis, okay, and psychobiological studies, okay, and also the relevance of physiological values generated by the clinical diagnostic tools. We were trying to do that. Here you find the diagrammatic representation of the steps followed in this experimentation. The participants first responded to the stress and the pre-morbidity questionnaire, okay. Then they were supposed to watch video clips, okay. So, now look at the video clips. You have the first video clip. This is basically a sequence of a communal riot. You now see the second video which shows the recent tsunami in Japan, the natural disaster. Now, once the participants watch these video clips, okay, while watching these video clips, we had recorded their physiological reaction, we recorded their GSR, the galvanic skin response, PR, that is their pulse rate, and then their breath rate. And once they had watched these clips, we asked them to report their subjective emotional arousal level and their subjective response on the basis of the video shown, that was also collected as a separate report. And this step 1, 2, 3 was repeated for all the 5 video sequences that you have seen here. What did we find here? You can see here, this is basically the Z score plotting of the GSR, pulse rate, respiration rate, as well as the subjective arousal, okay. And you can see the pattern. So, basically the reason why I am sharing this study with you is that you find that the way the physiological system responds to a situation, okay, might not be the way you emotionally experience it or the way you emotionally express it. Now, what we found here in this study was that the respondents, they did not differ on subjective arousal, okay, instigated by the exposure to this disaster and the sensual erotic stimulus, okay. And most importantly, the situational interpretation of the emotional content, okay, in order to arrive at the holistic picture of the human experience was found to be extremely important in this study. So, it is not only that what you see is important, okay, but the whole content of your emotional experiences, okay, that you churn and you come forward with the holistic experience, that is far more important. In another very recent study, this study is not yet completely concluded. What we did was that this time, unlike the previous case, we had the video exposure, okay, this time we had blindfolded the subjects and they were given only auditory stimulation, okay. The psychophysiological responses were recorded in response to religious prayers, okay. So, the participants, they were brought to the laboratory, they were blindfolded, okay, and then they listened to 6 different religious prayers. I will not play the full prayer for you, but you can listen to the glimpse of it. First, the Buddhist prayer. And now comes the Christian prayer. The next one was the Hindu prayer. Now, the Jewish prayer. The next prayer was of the Muslims.
Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim.
And finally, the prayers of the Sikh.
सोहेला सोहेला राग गौड़ी दीपकी मल्ला पहला एक ओंकार सतगुर प्रसाद.
So, now that you have got the glimpse of the 6 prayers that the participants were made to hear, okay, what we did was that once again we recorded the GSR, the breath rate and the pulse rate. How does your body responds to this type of auditory stimulation? Okay. And you can just see the plotting here. This is only the GSR plot for the Hindus represented in blue here, Muslims represented in green here, okay, and the Sikh represented in the cream color here. Okay. How when they listen to these prayers, okay, and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that you find here, these represents the different prayers in order. Okay. And the order was the same that you saw here. The first was Buddhist, 2 stands for Christian, 3 for Hindu, 4 for Jew, 5 for Muslim and 6 for the Sikh. Okay. So, this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 represents the 6 religious prayers. Okay. And how the GSR conductance rate varied for different prayers, that pattern you can see here. Now, you have the pattern for the pulse rate. Okay. How the pulse rate changed during different prayers. Okay. And you can find know that if you look at the GSR pattern and if you look at the pulse rate pattern, patterns are different. And here you have the pattern for the respiration rate. In a very, very interesting study, Davidson and his colleagues, they studied the Tibetan monks residing in Upper Dharamshala in India. Dharamshala is the location in India where a large number of migrant Tibetan refugees are residing. These are the people who have a large number of the monks and the nuns there. Okay. What Davidson did was that he selected a couple of Tibetan monks in Dharamshala, okay, and he mapped their brain, especially their prefrontal lobes, and what he did was that he performed the fMRI of the brain of these Tibetan monks when they were not meditating. Okay. And as you can see on your screen here, okay, what he saw was that their prefrontal lobes were lit even though they were not meditating. Okay. And remember that this is the area, the prefrontal lobe is the area which is extremely responsible for positive emotions. Okay. So, when you look at these outcomes, you see that the prefrontal lobe of these Tibetan monks, okay, are still lit, okay, although they are not meditating. You have the meditation and you have the baseline here, means when the meditation session is not in practice. So, irrespective of the fact that whether you are meditating or you are not doing so, okay, the prefrontal area had the highest consumption of glucose in the brain, representing that irrespective of the fact that you practice meditation or not, you are overall in a positive state of mood. Okay. And remember one thing, very recently, I should not say very recently, but 2-3 years back, as part of the PhD dissertation, one of the students here at IIT Kanpur, he worked with me on the post traumatic stress and growth in Tibetan refugees, and we did find a very interesting pattern. Of course, that was based on the behavioral measure, unlike the Davidson study of 2003, where the fMRI records were taken. Okay. But we also found based on our behavioral measures, okay, that there was no high degree of positive emotions in these Tibetan refugees, okay, the monks and the nuns. And here also Davidson found the same thing, okay, using the fMRI technique, that irrespective of the fact that whether you are meditating or not doing so, you remain in a mood state, okay, which is much more positively oriented. We are now shifting to one of the recent concepts in psychology, but very much talked about nowadays, what is called as emotional intelligence. This terminology was first used by Goleman in his book in 1995, and this basically refers to one's ability to perceive, assess and manage emotions of oneself, the others and the group. So, basically what you talk about in with respect to emotional intelligence is that you should be able to perceive the emotion of your own self, the emotion of others and the emotion of the group at large. You should be able to assess your own feelings, you should be able to assess the emotions of others, you should also be accurate in terms of assessing the emotion of the group. And then you should be good in terms of managing your own feelings, your own emotions. You should also be good in terms of taking care of the emotions of others, okay. And at the same time you should be equally good at managing the emotions of the groups. And this is considered to be one form of social intelligence according to Salovey and May. Know that this emotional intelligence is a form of social intelligence that involves the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, okay, to discriminate among them and to use this information to guide your thinking and your action. And we won't go into too much of detail of emotional intelligence, but just to briefly expose you to this very concept, that we talk of 25 competencies which are divided into 5 dimensions. Okay, we talk of emotional intelligence, and these 5 dimensions are self awareness, self management, motivation, empathy and social skills. Okay. So, these are the 5 dimensions of emotional intelligence: self awareness, self management, motivation, empathy and social skill. And now we will see one by one we will divide them and look into the competencies that are attached to these dimensions. So, first the dimensions of self awareness. It includes emotional awareness, accurate self assessment and self confidence. So, you are aware of the emotions, you are accurate in terms of assessing yourself, and then there is a degree of self confidence in you. Looking at the dimensions of self management, it includes self control, you have a voluntary control over yourself by and large. Trustworthiness, you consider yourself to be trustworthy, and of course, the others will also think so. Consentaneousness, okay, you are a man who has a higher degree of consciousness, okay. You think of things in terms of how just they are, adaptability and of course, innovation. So, these 5 are the dimensions of self management. Then the dimensions of motivation, which includes achievement drive, commitment, initiative and optimism. And then we have the dimensions of empathy, which includes the fact that you understand others, developing others, service orientation in you, leveraging diversity and political awareness. And then of course, now the whole 8 dimensions of social skill, including influence, communication, conflict management, leadership, change catalyst, building bonds, collaboration and cooperation, and finally team capabilities. So, overall it has been understood, it has been realized on the basis of the research inputs that understanding situation is important, okay. And then there are no certain degree of skills that are required. The very fact that you are very observant, you are a keen observer, that makes you very good. You are keen not only in terms of assessing the self, you are equally keen assessing others. Most importantly, you are also reflective. Remember, we have discussed the difference between rumination and reflection, okay. And then acknowledgement of success, okay. These are the important considerations. Damasio talked about the neurobiology of rationality, okay, and his work help understand the role of emotion in thinking. He also establishes emotion as essential contributor to rational decision making. So, unlike the general thing that you have to be more and more cognitively driven, thought driven, okay, and you should rely less and less on your emotional input in terms of rational decision making, okay. His work basically establishes that emotions are of significance, okay, even for rational decision making, and such work also underlies the concepts of emotional intelligence. So, remember we had already seen the how the cognitive and the emotional components they integrate in the brain some time back. And emotional intelligence, if you see the current the form of training that is given to certain sectors, people who fall in certain domains, you find that either through the usage of artificial intelligence or through some mock drills. Okay. On your screen you find here unexpected life situations. Now, here you find a completely unexpected life experiences, and what is most important is that you need to give training to the people, especially who execute certain functions, say like people in the uniformed services, for example. Okay. If you look at these images on the left panel and the center, okay, right panel is of course a room where you have comfortable chair, but then these are situations where with the help of virtual reality what you do is that you expose these people to certain life situations. When you are caught in a crossfire, when you lead a life that is full of stress, when you see bloodshed all around, when you have to perform that act. Okay. When you are in an extremely dangerous situation, life of the self, life of others are at threat. Okay. Situations where you have to hide to the greatest possible extent, you have to camouflage. We have seen in perception about the camouflage. So, all these things requires that you have to develop a certain degree of emotional intelligence. Okay. So, if you look at the basic dimensions and the 25 different competencies talked about, okay, emotional intelligence plays an extremely important role, and nowadays you will find not at many places, but of course, it has begun where you have training for emotional intelligence with the usage of artificial intelligence for people who are supposed to execute highly stressful job, especially those who are in the uniformed services. So, with this we have come to an end with respect to our discussion on the affective processes. We have talked about several concepts at length, and this is time for us to recapitulate.